Hey loves, it's been a little while. I'm surfacing, so there's going to be a lot more from me and from us here at Her Mystery School Central over the next few months. As I'm coming back in, I wanted to just share some time with you, some considerations around this wonderment of, are you suffering more than you actually really need to be? And are there a few ways in which that is true? And is there a possibility that you have more agency than you realize? Um, we all know that suffering is a part of life, and hopefully, in the school we've already moved through the month of the descent in Dark Mother, where we've actually come to a much deeper place of giving sacred context to suffering so that it has its resurrection inside of it, right? So that annihilations are connected to their own resurrection. It's part of, yeah, there's sacred context there, right? Now we've moved in the school into the 6th month, which is Alchemista. And in a way, in our mystery school, we pull ourselves, we stretch ourselves into different aspects, often seemingly possibly opposite aspects of She. The way in which the dissolving, the annihilations, the surrender that's necessary there, right? That's Dark Mother. It's not about your will force, right? Here we are now in the school in Alchemista where it's all about your will force. It's all about choice. It's all about energetic savvy. It's all about influence in the world. It's all about creating something from nothing. So it's very much about finding will force and somehow letting that be informed by surrender, letting that be informed by the reality of dissolution so that it remains true, right? So that we have trustworthy will force. Not will force based on what we should be doing, habituations, coercions, not will force that runs us into the ground, not will force that, takes or seeks to take the will force of others or use it. So I wanted to offer from that context, the context of Alchemista, and what we're working with in the school right now, which is a lot about how do you turn poison into medicine? How do you purify the element that you are? How do you actually become potent, congruent, focused and specific enough that you can be recognizable in this world, that you can be of influence? How can you hold real potency and power and have a will force that you and others can trust, right? So I wanted to, from that, what we end up talking about a lot is the reality that, look, you are, whether you might be not conscious of it, but you are an alchemical being, right? I bet if you look, you'll see that in many ways, a lot of what you are attempting to do or doing unconsciously or doing successfully is you are transmuting poisons into medicine. You are harmonizing. You are bringing the elements of life together to create new, right? You are seeking to be of influence in the world, right? You are a transmutational being. I mean, this is part of what we are doing here, is we are learning, we're purifying, we are encountering our own and others' distortions, and we are seeking to clarify them, purify them, and come back. Remember truth, remember who we really are, right? So Alchemista is very much about that. And one of the baseline things that is important then and that we claim this month is that we are alchemical vessels and that we can continue to be unconscious in that. And that is what it is. But if we bring consciousness to it, then all of a sudden we know what we're doing. We can care for ourselves much more deeply and with much more acumen, right? With much more wisdom. And we can successfully alchemize because we know that's what we're doing, so we do the right things. So, for instance, there's tons of poisons in the world, right? There are many, many things, many distortions that are kind of in their process of being clarified and returned to some kind of true root. One of the greatest dangers of alchemizing those things, engaging with those things, is that you can become the poison before you even know it. Or it can poison you and make you sick, right? So that's one thing that if you know that what you are doing is you're transmuting poison into medicine, then you can start to think and understand and gather the understandings of how does one do that in a good way, right? So you don't get overcome by the process, right? You're purifying, right? And how do you purify? How do you sift yourself out of all other things, right? So a couple considerations from this. Just the first kind of assumption or recognition that we have is that you're an alchemical vessel. I generally speak to women. Women have wombs. We create life from nothing. There is a lot in our beings, in our bodies, in our subtle bodies, in the depth of who we are that is alchemical, that transforms, that births from nothing, right? So we want to come to a place where we are wisely tending to that and reclaiming some of the lost knowledge, some of the lost wisdom that enables us to do that well, so that we come to the end of our lives supple and feeling good about the influence that we were in the world, having community and companionship, rather than coming to the end of our lives rigid, paralyzed by polarization, right? Isolated, living in a world that we are partly responsible for creating, that is a world of alienation. I digress. Let me talk about these few things. I wanted you to just consider them because this is what we're considering in this school, and maybe we consider it all together. So the first thing to consider, I've mentioned it before, is that if you understand that you're an alchemical vessel, that you are working to transmute, know that on a fundamental level, alchemy only succeeds if there is enough fuel to fuel the process, to fuel the fire of the process, but not too much. Not so much that the vessel itself cracks and breaks and then there is nothing, right? So this is enormous right now, especially given the climate and the way that the media works, the way the overstimulation of the overculture, right? Just in your own way, maybe now, without even thinking too hard about it, you can sense into, are you transmuting too much? Are you taking in too much? More than you can possibly live well with, live in wellness with. What that means is, take media for example. Are you watching the same horrible things over and over again? Are you sitting? Be aware of what you're actually doing. Your mind may be thinking, making opinions, talking about it, whatever, but is your being actually sitting in hopeless paralysis? Right? Because likely that's true. If you're just taking in images, taking in information, taking in all of this, right? So we want to be careful. You want to take in just enough to fuel your fire, right? And no more than that. And that's way less than what you're taking in. I'm almost 100% sure of it. So we want to consider that. One way in which you may be suffering way more than you need to be is by relentlessly exposing and re-exposing yourself to suffering that you cannot control or improve, that you can't help, right? The magnitude of suffering, if you open to it, is devastating. It's too much. And this isn't about compassion or caring, this is about usefulness. You want to be of use. You want to be of good influence. You want to know what is your part. No more, but no less, so that you can fulfill your role here as part of the good. And so we have to be careful, right? We live in a world that will deliberately or unconsciously, probably both, poison us, overwhelm us, overstimulate us to the point of dysfunction, of paralysis, and also of polarization, right? So when you're considering how you're just handling life, how you're handling particularly the suffering that's outside of you, right? Although this applies to your own suffering, right? There are things inside, there's your rage, there's your grief, there's all the things that live inside of you. You want to contact that, bring it into your present moment, be present with it, but titrate, meaning take little bits of it, work with it slowly over time. Alchemy generally is a process that happens over time. It requires slow time, perseverance, rhythm. It requires the time that it takes in order for something to alchemize, and we often rush it because it's so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable to be suffering ourselves. It is so intolerable to witness the suffering of others, right? We have got to become resilient in those places so that we can be useful, right? And so that we can be well and then help others become well. So be aware. Are you just taking in too much? That one thing, that alone can change everything for you in terms of your level of suffering, right? Don't go numb. We don't want to like take none in, because it's in relationship to the needs and the truth and the movement in our world that you will find your place. I mean, your place is in relationship to the greater whole, but understanding the proportions of that, right? Alchemy is very much about proportion. That's how we bring elements together to make more life. So that's one consideration. Not so much that you break the vessel, but not too little so that you just don't have any fuel for your fire. Another thing to consider that may be creating more suffering than what is actually necessary for you right now is, or even asked for, we are asked to suffer, we're asked to burn sometimes, and we're asked to, we don't know why, but we're asked to walk through initiations that are very hard at times, but we don't want to do more than what we are really being asked to do by life or self. So one way in which we create a lot more suffering is that we seek control rather than influence. And this requires a level of self-transparency, Are you seeking to control? Or are you seeking to influence your world for the good, for the better? You can control things, but you will always be acting then in violation of natural law, sacred law, and will force, right? The God-given will force of each human being. So there will be consequences, always, and they will create suffering. They'll create deception, they'll create resentment, it'll create all the things that controlling does. Seeking influence rather than control means that you are not abdicating your power. You're not just letting it all go and be what it is. You are standing up to be of influence, to have agency, to be an expression of your own truth. But you are doing it in a way that influences, that invites, right? And that models what it is you want to see in the world. The alchemista creates something from nothing. She is here to create a new world. She is here to serve the realm that is hers to serve from deep within and actually bring something of beauty to it, right? So seeking control rather than influence, just be honest. It's okay. It happens all the time. It's a very overwhelming world, but if you seek control, you will reap what you've sown, right? And that will be suffering. If you seek influence, if you seek connection, if you seek to become fully what it is that you are trying to control the world to be, then you are going to reap that. And what that is fruition. That is fullness. And that is a kind of potency that the world trusts and that you can trust. Another way of saying this is, will you learn to manage your own energy first before you attempt to manage the circumstances around you? That's a lot of what Alchemista is about. Alchemista is saying, look, your anger, your power, your grief, your sexuality, your vision, all of this is yours. It exists in this vessel, and your anxiety, all of it is power. Much of it can be unruly, and you are the one who's going to ride those stallions. If you choose to learn and cultivate that strength in your being, it takes time, right? But we learn to manage our own energy rather than to manage circumstances, and two things happen there. One is we find peace. I mean, you do know already, I'm sure, how many circumstances are in one way or another out of your control, even if you try to control them. So when we come into being like, all right, I'm going to manage, this is your God-given sacred right domain. It's your energy. No matter what other things have been kind of entrained into us, the reality is that sacred law is behind you. When you come into really cultivating and learning how to work with what you are, how to get up on the stallion of your rage, how to tame your anxiety, right? All these things, sacred law is with you, and you are going to find more and more peace because you will have the peace that exists regardless of circumstance. So that's one way in which that really deeply does alleviate your suffering. It takes cultivation and time, but it breaks that spell of feeling, and there's a reason why we feel this way, but feeling like we are at the mercy of all these circumstances and therefore have to control them somehow, right? This dominion, this inner dominion, there's such liberation in it, right? The second piece of that is actually that's where you become of influence to circumstances. I've seen it so many times in my own life and now more and more and more in the school. When you actually come in and you do actually manage, shift, transmute your own energy, not your mind, not the way you're thinking and not what you're saying, which can be just about whatever it can be. It doesn't have to reflect at all what you actually are, right? We know this. If you come in, you become coherent, congruent, and you shift your own energy, it's amazing what will happen. People will shift on their own. Situations will shift on their own because you've changed and you are the center pole of the sphere that is moving around you. It's inevitable. It has to happen. It's another natural law, right? So there's something that you can build over time that also alleviates your suffering, is a sense of your agency when you do cultivate your own sovereignty. That it does actually end up translating into shifting the circumstances of your life, of our world, of your relationships. And it shifts them in a way that is natural, that is free of the manipulations of what your external moving will force would have imposed, right? So, a lot of what we're looking toward in her mystery school is being in alignment with greater harmonies than we even know. Being in alignment with forces for the good that are bigger than we are, that have, that we don't want the responsibility to be more than what we are. We are flawed, right? So we seek to align ourselves with natural law, with sacred law, and with principles that actually do generate and help us to serve right action, right timing, right proportion, right? So that's one other consideration. And that's a huge consideration because there's surrender required if you're going to seek influence rather than control. And I mean, we develop all these things. There's only so much I can give you here because I can't guide you. We can't go all these places together. But I know that me just saying it, if it lights up something in you, it's already starting movement inside of you, right? You know these things. There's nothing in her mystery school. There's nothing anywhere that isn't already inside of you. It's just a matter of, can anything outside of you support you to remember those things, support you to stay close to those things, right? So anyway, that's why I do these videos. There's one other thing, there's a bunch, but we are getting into it here and I need to probably roll it up if you've even stayed with me this long. Because I want to talk about fear and anxiety because that's where a lot of suffering lies, obviously. And I know that one extremely well. I just want to name this, and again, I can't guide you there, but maybe you just feel it, just see how you follow it. You will suffer a lot more than you need to from fear and anxiety if you don't somehow remember and know, look, your fears and your anxiety, if you can settle them, if you can follow them, to their original, the deeper root of them, there will always be a sober, very empowering instinct. Okay, so I'll say that again. This is like, there's a lot of context around this for the school, but basically, what fear is, what anxiety is how I see it anyway. There's a sober instinct that goes off in you. This is dangerous. Something has changed. Something doesn't, there's incongruity here, right? Or just the red flag, the knowing of like something's off here, right? That's the sober instinct. It is sober. It's awareness. It's an instinct, and it's power. It's here to say, be aware, notice, eyes open, right? There's going to be some choices to make. Don't go to sleep here, right? Take care. You need to, this requires your attention. That sober instinct gets blown up and more dispersed, more and more light and airy, and this is false yang if you've studied with me, more and more away from its root because of the overstimulation of our culture, the lack, our much of what is orphaned in us when we don't have a root, especially in a holy sister brotherhood, right? When we don't have that, when we're afraid of death, when we're afraid of change, there's a bunch of reasons why, but what'll happen is that sober instinct will just start to kind of, it does what it does. It moves into anxiety. It gets filled with your worst imaginings. It gets filled with all your fears, It gets filled with other people and all their fears, because now you're reaching out, trying to figure out where you are and what's right and what's wrong and what's true and all these things. Meanwhile, you had that sober instinct in the beginning, and that is yours, and it's your power, and it will guide you through whatever is scary, right? So there is this, and I'm just going to invite it because we work with it in the school, and it is something to work with, because anxiety and fear, especially in a culture that exacerbates fear, in a media culture that makes money and exists because of your fear, and in order to continue and perpetuate your fear and your sense that the world is full of nightmares, right? We're up against some really big movements that don't have our best interests at heart. Okay, that's how it is. That's how it always is. That is the heroine's journey, right? Here we are. Let's accept it, sober. However, if I can just say to you, look, I promise you, really, I do, that your fear and anxiety has at its root a very sober awareness and an instinct. And that instinct has at its root right action, and what's going to help you, and what's going to guide you, and what is going to keep you safe in a way that nothing in our world, nothing in the external world can keep you safe, right? So, in conclusion, it's always interesting for me to just, I bring these out because I know that wisdom is wisdom. And if any of this resonates with you, it's going to fortify what's already inside of you. Even though, well, maybe many of us might be in the school together, and you're always welcome to join. But the point is, we're still together. In the school, not in the school. I'm here with you. We are walking this, walking this together. So a few ways in which you may be suffering, you're probably suffering way more than you need to. One is, you are not honoring that you're an alchemical vessel and just letting it be as simple as, I only take in enough to keep my fire fueled, but I will not take in so much that I break my vessel, right? So much that I can't transmute it. Know your limits. And you know them because you will either feel well or you will not feel well. You'll either be able to hold on to the good in life and continue to nurture it, or you'll start to atrophy away from it, right? You'll become poisoned, and you can feel it. We know when that is. So that is a simple thing. You've taken on more than you can transmute, right? Maybe out of your own good nature. It doesn't matter. We need you useful. We want you to feel good. We want you to be sustained and strong. We care about you, right? So you are loved here. And what that means is take on only what you need in order to do what is yours, to be empowered, to be fueled. And don't torture yourself with more than what you can handle, right? And make the choices that make that true. Turn off the TV. Stop reading whatever you're reading. Stop the conversations, right? Find it. Find where the limits are. And you'll see yourself start to potentize. And all of a sudden, out of that potency is going to come your real answer and your much more magnificent gift to give, right? The second thing was what? Seeking influence rather than control. Going ahead and burning in that, just like all of us need to, if we are ever going to live in true reciprocal respect for one another, if we are ever going to really be a family of humankind. Seek influence rather than control, and know that your influence from a place of having really come into self-possession, come into power in your own dominion, in your own sovereign being. That is going to be so much better for everyone. Everything you might be trying to control to happen, if it wants to happen, it will, by your influence and by your example and by your modeling. And then you can have so much more peace because you are no longer beholden like that to circumstance. And you are no longer beholden to all the things that you can't control, even if you try. You know, the problem with controlling rather than influencing is that it is impossible. Beyond it having, it yielding rotten fruits, right? It is also impossible. The final piece was acknowledge, consider that your fear and your anxiety, when it comes up, particularly if it's loud, somewhere at the root of it is a sober instinct, and you can find that. It might take support. It often does, right? Because we get wound up. But that sober instinct will keep you safe. Whether you live, whether you die, whatever's in front of you, that sober instinct is God-given. It is here for you. It's here to guide you, right? But what happens when things are blown out of, when we move up into fear and anxiety and all the overstimulation and all the stories and all the everything and all the people and all the history, it's just, we lose. How could you not lose your hearing, your listening to that simple, instinctual, sober awareness that's going to guide you through this path now, the life in front of you, the life and the death, the challenges and the beauties in front of you. That's the kind of alliance we want. The world can't give you that, right? But it will take all your power if you let it. There are too many forces around that are hungry ghosts, right? So this thing about how are you suffering more than you can has so much to do with, will you hold what you are? Will you hold power? Like real, like potency, deep knowing. Will you respect yourself as an alchemical creature? Will you respect your limitations? Right? Will you let your life shift in order to protect you in these ways? In order to keep you influential, keep you feeling enough of yourself, self-possessed enough that you can be congruent and therefore felt, therefore received, therefore articulate, and therefore trustworthy. Those are some of my thoughts, straight out of Alchemista here in her mystery school. I love you. I hope that was useful in any possible way. And yeah, I'm here with you. As the alchemizing way over here. And I have another video coming up. We're going to talk about freeing you from self-sabotage, which is another, the concept of self-sabotage, which is another really important and enormous teaching in the month of Alchemista. So that's coming up probably in just a couple days. All right, so much love to all of you. Blessed be.